most important learnings of our lives have come through stories. I'm going to share with you a very powerful story, okay, from a very famous, very popular book. You might have definitely heard about this. The book is called Who Moved My Cheese. You read it, right? So you heard about it at least. Okay, so let me see. Do you want to know how to anticipate change, adapt to change quickly, enjoy change, and be ready to change quickly again and again? Then, instead of reading the book yourself, I'm going to read it here for you. So, guys, do share to my channel on YouTube if you have not done so far, and you know, press the bell, okay, and also click a like on this video if you like it, right? Now, what's so special about this book? Okay, Daily Telegraph says that this is one of the most successful books ever. Okay, let me read about this book. Who Moved My Cheese is a simple parable that reveals profound truths. It is an amusing and enlightening story of four characters who live in a maze and look for cheese to nourish them and make them happy. Cheese is a metaphor for what you want in life, whether it is a good job, loving relationship, money, or a possession, health, or spiritual peace of mind. And the maze is where you look for what you want, the organization you work, or the family or community you live in. So this book has come from the best-selling author Dr. Spencer Johnson. So guys, let's read the book Who Moved My Cheese. It's an amazing story that I read many years back. So let's get going. All right. Okay, where does it start? Hmm. The story behind the story by Kenneth Blanchard, PhD. I am thrilled to be telling you the story behind the story of Who Moved My Cheese because it means the book has now been written and is available for all of us to read, enjoy, and share with others. This is something I have wanted to see happen ever since I first read Spencer Johnson's tell his great cheese story years ago before he wrote our book, The 1 Minute Manager, together. I remember thinking then how good the story was and how helpful it would be for me that moment on. Who Moved My Cheese is a story about the change that takes place in a maze where four amusing characters look for cheese. Cheese being a metaphor for what we want in life, whether it is a job, relationship, money, a big house, freedom, health, recognition, spiritual peace, or even an activity like jogging or golf. Each of us have our own idea of what cheese is, and we pursue it because we believe it makes us happy. If we get it, we often become attached to it, and if we lose it, it is often or it's taken away, it can be traumatic. The maze in the story represents where you spend time looking for what you want. It can be the organization you work in, the community you live in, or the relationships you have in your life. I tell cheese stories that you are about to read in my talks around the world and often hear later from people about the difference it has made to their life. Believe it or not, this little story has been credited with improving careers, marriages, and lives. One of the many real life examples comes from Charlie Jones, a respected broadcaster from NBC TV, who revealed that hearing the story of Who Moved My Cheese saved his career. His job as a broadcaster is unique, but the principle he learned can be used by anyone. Here's what happened. Charlie had worked hard and has done a great job of broadcasting track and field events in earlier Olympic Games. So he was surprised and upset that when his boss told him he has been removed from the job and these showcase events for the next Olympiads and assigned to swimming and diving. Not knowing these sports as well, he was frustrated, he felt unappreciated and became angry. He said he felt it wasn't fair. His anger began to affect everything he did. Then he heard the story of Who Moved My Cheese. After that, he said he laughed at himself and changed his attitude. He realized his boss had just moved his cheese, so he adapted. He learned the two new sports in the process, found that doing something new made him feel young. It wasn't long before his boss recognized his new attitude and energy, and he soon got better assignment. He went on to enjoy more success than ever and was later into the Pro Football's Hall of Fame Broadcasters Alley. That's just one of many real life stories I've heard about the impact of this story has had on people from this work life to their life love life. I'm such a strong believer in the power of Who Moved My Cheese that I gave a copy of an early publication edition to everyone working in our company. Why? Because like everyone in the company that want to not only survive on future by staying competitive, The Ken Blanchard companies are constantly changing. They keep moving our cheese. While in the past we may have wanted loyal employees, today we need flexible people who are not possessive about the way things are done around here. And yet, as you know, living in a constant white water with a change occurring all the time at work in life can be stressful unless people have a way of looking at change that keeps them understand enter the cheese story. When I told people about the story and then got to read Who Moved My Cheese, you could almost feel the release of negative energy beginning to occur. Person after person from every department went out of their way to thank me for the book and told me how helpful it had been to them already in seeing the changes going into our company in a different light. Believe me, this brief parable takes little time to read, but its impact can be profound. As you turn pages, you will find three sections of the book. The first, a gathering former classmates talk in a class reunion about trying to deal with changes happening in their lives. The second section is the story of Who Moved My Cheese, which is the core of the book. In the story, you will see the two mice do better than they are faced and change because they keep things simple. All right. So this is how the introduction goes. Now let us come to the book. Okay. I've left a few lines in the introduction for you to maybe read the one day. But let's come to the a gathering in Chicago. All right. One Sunday in Chicago, several former classmates who were good friends in school gathered for lunch, having attended their high school reunion the night before. They wanted to hear more about what's happening in each other's lives. After a good deal of kidding and a good meal, they settled into an interesting conversation. Angela, who had been one of the most popular in the class, said, "Life sure turned out differently than I thought it would when we were in school. A lot has changed." "It certainly has," Nathan echoed. They knew he had gone into family's business, which had operated pretty much the same and had been part of the local community for as long as they could remember. So they were surprised when he seemed concerned. He asked, "But have you noticed how we don't want to change when things change?" Carlos said, "I guess we resist changing because we are afraid of change." "Carlos, you are the captain of football team," Jessica said. "I never thought I'd hear you say anything about being afraid." They all laughed as they realized that although all they had gone on different directions, from working at home to managing companies, they were experiencing similar feelings. Everyone was trying to cope up with the unexpected changes that were happening to them in recent years. The most admitted that they did not know how to a good way to handle them. Then Michael said, "I used to be afraid of change. When a big change came along in our business, we didn't know what to do. So we didn't adjust and we almost lost it." "That is," he continued, "until heard a funny little story that changed everything." "How so?" Nathan asked. "Well, the story changed the way I looked at the change, from losing something to gaining something, and it showed me how to do it. After that, things quickly improved at work and in my life. At first, I was annoyed with the obvious simplicity of the story because it sounded like something we might have been told at school. Then I realized I was really annoyed with myself for not seeing the obvious and doing what works when things change. When I realized from the four characters in the story represented the various parts of myself, I decided who I wanted to act like and I changed. Later, I passed the story to some people in our company and they passed it to others. And soon our business did much better because most of us adapted to change better. And like me, many people said it helped them in their personal lives. However, there were a few people who said that they got nothing out of it. They either knew the lessons and were already living them, or more commonly, they thought they already knew everything and didn't want to learn. They couldn't see why so many others were benefiting from it. When one of the senior executives who was having different difficulty in adapting said the story was a waste of time, the other people credited him saying that they knew which character he was in the story, meaning the one who learned nothing and did not change. "What's the story?" Angela asked. "It's called Who Moved the Cheese." The group laughed. I think I like it already," Carlos said. "Would you tell us the story? Maybe we can get something from it." "Sure," Michael replied. "I'd be happy to do it. It doesn't take long." And so he began. Who moved my cheese? Here's the story. Once, long ago, in a land far away, there lived four little characters who ran through a maze looking for cheese to nourish them and make them happy. Two were mice named Sniff and Scurry, and two were little people, beings who were as small as mice but who looked and acted a lot like people today. Their names were Hem and Haw. So Sniff and Scurry, mouse, Hem and Haw, the people. Due to their small size, it would be easy not to notice what the four of them were doing, but if you look closely enough, you would discover the most amazing things. Every day, the mice and the little hope spent time in the maze looking for their own special cheese. The mice sniff and scurry, processing simple brains and good instincts, search for the hard nibbling cheese they liked, as mice often do. The two little people, Hem and Haw, use their complex brains to fill with many beliefs and emotions to search for a very different kind of cheese with a capital C, which they believed would make them feel happy and successful. As different as the mice of Little Hope were, they shared something in common. Every morning, they each put on their jogging suits and running shoes, left their homes, and raced out to the maze looking for their favorite cheese. The maze was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, some containing delicious cheese, but there were also dark corners and blind alleys leading nowhere. It was an easy place for anyone to get lost. However, for those who found their way, the maze holds secrets, let them enjoy a better life. The mice, Sniff and Scurry, used the simple trial and error method of finding cheese. They ran down one corridor, and if it proved empty, they turned to the other and ran down. They remembered the corridors that held no cheese and quickly went into new areas. Sniff would smell out the great general direction of the cheese using his great nose, and Scurry would race ahead. They got lost, as you might expect, went off in the wrong direction, and often bumped into walls, but after a while, they found their way. Like the mice, the two little people, Hem and Haw, also use their ability to think and learn from their past experiences. However, they relied on the complex brains to develop more sophisticated methods of finding cheese. Sometimes they did well, but at other times their powerful human beliefs and emotions took over and clouded the way they look at things. It made life in the maze more complicated and challenging. Nonetheless, Sniff, Scurry, Hem, and Haw all discovered in their own way that what they were looking for. They each found their own kind of cheese, and one day at the end of the corridors in choice in and one day they each found their own kind of cheese one day at the end of one of the corridors in cheese section C. Every morning after that, the mice and the little people dressed in their running gear and headed to the cheese section C. It wasn't long before they each established their own routine. Sniff and Scurry continued to wake early day and race to the maze, always following the same route. When they arrived at their destination, the mice took off their running shoes, tied them together, and hung them around their necks so they could get to them quickly when they needed again. Then they enjoyed the cheese. In the beginning, Hem and Haw also raced towards the cheese station C every morning to enjoy the tasty new morsels that awaited them. But after a while, the different routine set in for the little people. Hem and Haw, awake each day a little later, dressed a little slower, and walked to cheese station C. After all, they knew where the cheese was now and how to get there. They had no idea where the cheese came from or who put it there. They just assumed it would be there. As soon as Ham and Haw arrived at cheese station C each morning, they settled in and made themselves at home. They hung up their jogging suits, put away their running shoes, and put on their slippers. They were becoming very comfortable now that they had found the cheese. This is great, Hem said. There's enough cheese here to last us forever. The little people felt happy and successful and thought they were now secure. It wasn't long before Hem and Haw regarded the cheese they found as Cheese Station C as their cheese. It was such a large store of cheese that they eventually moved their homes to be closer to it and built a social life around it. To make themselves feel more at home, Hem and Haw decorated the walls and with sayings and even draw pictures of cheese around them, which made them smile. One read, "Having cheese makes you happy." Sometimes Hem and Haw would take their friends by to see their pile of cheese at cheese station C and pointing to it with pride. See, pretty cheese, yeah? Sometimes they shared it with their friends and sometimes they didn't. We deserve this cheese, Hem said. We certainly had to work long and hard enough to find it. He picked up a nice fresh piece and ate it. Afterward, Hem fell asleep. He often did. Every night, the little people would waddle home, full of cheese, and every morning they would confidently return for more. This went on for quite some time. After a while, Hem's and Haw's confidence grew into arrogance of success. Soon they became so comfortable they didn't even notice what was happening. As the time went on, Sniff and Scurry continued their routine. They arrived early each morning and sniffed and scratched the scurried around the section C, inspecting the area to see if there has been any changes from the day before. Then they would sit down to nibble the cheese. One morning they arrived at cheese station C and discovered there was no cheese. They weren't surprised. Since Sniff and Scurry had noticed the supply of cheese had been getting smaller every day, they were prepared for the inevitable and knew instinctively what to do. They looked at each other, removed the running shoes they had tied together and hung conveniently around their necks, put them on their feet, and laced them up. The mice did not overanalyze things. To the mice, the problem and answer were both simple. The situation at Cheese Station C had changed, so Sniff and Scurry decided to change. They both looked out into the maze, then Sniff and lifted his nose, sniffed around, and nodded to Scurry, who took off running through the maze, while Sniff followed as fast as he could. They were quickly off in search of new cheese. Later that same day, Hem and Haw arrived at the cheese station C. They had not been paying attention to the small changes that had been taking place each day, so they took it for granted the cheese would be there. They were unprepared for what they found. What? No cheese? Hem yelled. He continued yelling, no cheese, as though if he had shouted loud enough, someone would put it back. Who moved my cheese? He shouted. Finally, he put his hand on his hips, his face turned red, and he screamed at the top of his voice, "It is not fair." Haw just took his head in disbelief. He too had on finding cheese and cheese station C. He stood there for a long time, frozen with shock. He was just not ready for this. Haim was yelling something, but Haw didn't want to hear. He didn't want to deal with what was facing him, so he just turned everything out. He so he so he just tuned everything out. With little people's behavior was not very attractive or productive, but it was understandable. Finding cheese wasn't easy, and it meant a great deal more to the little people than just having enough of it to eat every day. Finding cheese with little people's way of getting what they thought they needed to be happy. They had their own ideas of what cheese meant to them, depending on their taste. So let's see. For some, finding cheese was having material things. For others, it was enjoying good health or developing spiritual sense of well-being. For Haw, cheese meant feeling safe, having a loving family, someday living in a cozy cottage on Cheddar Lane. To him, cheese was becoming a big cheese in charge of others and owning a big house atop the Chamberlain Hill. Because cheese was important to them, the two little people spent a long time trying to decide what to do next. All they could think was to keep looking around Cheeseless Station C to see if cheese was really gone. While Sniff and Scurry had quickly moved on, Hem and Haw continued to hem and haw. They ranted and raved and at the injustice of it all. House House started to get depressed. What would happen if the cheese wasn't there tomorrow? He hadn't made future plans based on this cheese. He had made plans based on this cheese. The little people could not believe it. How could this ever happen? No one had warned them it wasn't right. It was not the way things were supposed to be. Hem and Haw went home that night hungry and discouraged, but before they left, Haw wrote on the wall, the most important the more important your cheese is to you, the more you want to hold on to it. Okay, he wrote on the wall, the more important your cheese is to you, the more you want to hold on to it. The next day, him and Hall left their homes and returned to the cheese station C again. Where they still expected somehow to find their cheese. The situation had not changed. The cheese was no longer there. The little people did not know what to do. Him and Haw just stood there, immobilized like the two statues. Haw shut his eyes as tight as he could and put his hands over his ears. He just wanted to block everything out. He didn't want to know the cheese supply had gradually been getting smaller. He believed it had been moved all of a sudden. Haim analyzed the situation over and over and eventually had complicated brain with its huge belief system took hold. Why did they do this to me? He demanded. What's really going on here? Finally, Haw opened his eyes, looked around, and said, by the way, where are Sniff and Scurry? Do you think they know something we don't? Haim scoffed. What would they know? Haim continued, they are just mice. They just respond to what happens. We are little people. We are smarter than mice. We should be able to figure this out. I know we are smarter, Haw said, but we don't seem to be acting smarter at this moment. Things are changing around here. Him. Maybe we need to change and do things differently. Why should we change? Him asked. We are little people, we are special. This sort of thing should not happen to us. Or if it does, we should at least get some benefits. Why should we get benefits? Haw asked. Because we are entitled, Haim claimed. Entitled to what? Haw wanted to know. We are entitled to our cheese. Why? Because we didn't cause this problem, Haim said. Somebody else did, and we should get something out of it. Haw suggested. Maybe we should simply stop analyzing the situation so much and go find some new cheese. Oh no, Haim argued, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. While Haim and Haw were still trying to decide what to do, Sniff and Scurry were already well on their way. They went further into the maze, up and down corridors, looking for cheese in every cheese station they could find. They didn't think of anything else but finding new cheese. They didn't find any for some time until they finally went into an area of the maze where they had never been before. Cheese section N. They squealed with delight. They found what they had been looking for, a great new supply of new cheese. They could hardly believe their eyes. It was the biggest store of cheese the mice had ever seen. In the meantime, Ham and Haw were still back in their cheese station C, evaluating their situation. They were now suffering from the effects of having no cheese. They were becoming frustrated and angry and were blaming each other for the situation they were in. Now and then, Haw thought about this mice friends, Sniff and Scurry, and wondered if they had found any cheese yet. He believed they might be having a hard time as running through the maze usually involved some uncertainty. But he also knew it was likely to only last for a while. Sometimes Haw would imagine Sniff and Scurry finding new cheese and enjoying it. He thought about how good it would be for him to be out in the adventure in the maze and to find fresh new cheese. He could almost taste it. The more clearly Haw saw image of himself finding and enjoying new cheese, the more he said himself he saw himself leaving the cheese station C. Let's go, he explained all of a sudden. No, Ham quickly responded. I like it here. It's comfortable. It's what I know. Besides, it's dangerous out there. No, it is not, Haw urged. We have run through many parts of the maze before, and we can do it again. I'm getting too old for that, Ham said. And I'm afraid I'm not interested in getting lost and making a fool of myself. Are you? With that, Haw's fear of failing returned and his hope of finding new cheese faded. So every day, the little people continued to do what they had done before. They went to cheese station C, found no cheese, and returned home carrying their worries and frustrations with them. They tried to deny what was happening, but found it harder to get to sleep, had less energy the next day, and were becoming irritable. Their homes were not the nurturing places they were once. The little people had different difficulty sleeping and were having nightmares about not finding any cheese. But Haim and Haw still returned to the cheese station C and waited there every day. Haim said, you know, if we just work harder, we'll find that nothing has really changed that much. The cheese is probably nearby. Maybe they just hid it behind the wall. The next day, Haim and Haw returned with tools. Haim held the chisel while Haw banged on the hammer until they made a hole in the wall of cheese station C. They peered inside but found no cheese. They were disappointed but believed that they could solve the problem, so they started earlier, stayed longer, and worked harder. But after a while, all they had was a large hole in the wall. Haw was beginning to realize the difference between activity and productivity. Maybe, Haim said, we should just sit here and see what happens. Sooner or later, they have to put the cheese back. Haw wanted to believe that, so each day he went home to rest and reluctantly returned with him to cheese station C, but the cheese never reappeared. By now, the little people were growing weak from hunger and stress. Haw was getting tired of just waiting from the station to improve. He began to see that the longer he stayed in their cheeseless situation, the worse off they would be. Haw knew they were losing their edge. Finally, one day, Haw began laughing at himself. Ha ha, look at us. We keep doing the same things over and over again and wonder why things don't get better. If this wasn't so ridiculous, it would be even funnier. Haw did not like the idea of having to run through the maze again because he knew he would get lost and have no idea where to he would find the cheese. But he had to laugh at his folly when he saw what his fear was doing to him. He asked him, where did you put our running shoes? It took a long time for them to find out because they had put everything away when they found their cheese in the cheese section C, thinking they wouldn't be needing them anymore. As Haim saw his friend getting into his running gear, he said, you are not really going out to maze again, are you? Why don't you just wait here until with me until they put the cheese back? Because you just don't get it, Haw said. I didn't want to see it either, but now I realize they are never going to put the cheese back. It's time to find the new cheese. Haim argued, but if there is no cheese out there, or even if there is, what if you don't find it? I don't know, Haw said. He had asked himself before some questions too many times and felt the fears again and kept him where he was. He asked himself, where am I most likely to find cheese here in this maze? He painted the picture in his mind. He saw himself venturing into the maze with a smile on his face. While this picture surprised him, it made him feel good. He saw himself getting lost now and then in the maze, but felt confident he would eventually find new cheese out there and get all the good things that came with it. He gathered his courage. Then he used his imagination to paint the most unbelievable picture he could, with the most realistic details of him finding and enjoying the taste of new cheese. He saw himself eating Swiss cheese with holes in it, bright orange cheddar, and American cheeses, Italian mozzarella, and wonderfully soft French Camembert cheese, and so on. Then he heard him saying something and realized they were still in the cheese section C. Haim said, sometimes, Haw said, sometimes Haim, things change and they are never do the same again. This looks like that one situation. That's life. Life moves on, and so we should. Haw looked at his immense, emaciated companion and tried to talk sense to him, but Haim's fear had turned into anger, and he wouldn't listen. Haw didn't mean to be rude to his friend, but he had to laugh at how silly they both looked. As Haw prepared to leave, he started to feel more alive, knowing that he was finally able to laugh at himself, let go, and move on. He laughed and announced, it's maze time. Haim didn't laugh and he didn't respond. Haw picked up a small sharp rock and wrote a serious thought on the wall for him to think about it. As was the custom, Haw drew a picture of cheese around it, hoping it would help him to smile, lighten up, and go after the new cheese, but him didn't want to see it. It read, if you do not change, you can become extinct. If you do not change, you can become extinct. Then Haw stuck his head out and peered anxiously into the maze. He thought about how he had gotten himself into this cheeseless situation. He had believed that there may not be any cheese in the maze, or he may not find it. Such fearful beliefs were immobilizing and killing him. Haw smiled. He knew him was wondering who moved my cheese, but Haw was wondering why didn't I get up and move with the cheese sooner? As he started into the maze, Haw looked back to where he had been come from and felt its comfort. He could feel himself being drawn back into familiar territory, even though he hadn't found cheese here for some time. Haw became more anxious and wondered if he really wanted to go out into the maze. He wrote a saying on the wall ahead of him and started stared at it for some time. This saying said, what would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you do if you were not afraid? He thought about it. He knew sometimes some fear can be good. When you are afraid, things are going to get worse if you don't do something. It can prompt you into action, but it is not good when you are afraid, when you are so afraid that it keeps you from doing anything. He looked to his right, to the part of the maze where he had never been, and felt the fear. Then he looked deep and breath, and he then took a deep breath, turned right into the maze and jogged slowly into the unknown. As he tried to find his way, Haw worried, as the first he might have worried too long in the cheese section C. He didn't had any cheese for so long that he was now weak. It took him longer and it was more painful than usual to get through the maze. He decided that if he ever got a chance again, he would get into the comfort zone and adapt to change sooner. It would make things easier. Then Haw smiled, a weak smile, as he thought, better late than never. During the next several days, Haw found a little cheese here and there, but nothing that lasted very long. He had hoped to find enough cheese to take some back to him and encourage him to come out into the maze. But Haw didn't find confident enough. He had to admit he found it confusing in the maze. Things seemed to have changed since the last time he was out there. Just when he thought he was getting ahead, he would get lost in the corridors. It seemed his progress was two steps forward and one step backward. It was a challenge, but he had to admit that being back in the maze hunting for cheese wasn't really as bad as he feared it might be. As time went on and he began to wonder if it was realistic for him to expect to find new cheese, he wondered if it had bitten off more than he could chew. Then he laughed, realizing that he had nothing to chew at that moment. Whenever he started to get discouraged, he reminded himself that what he was doing, as uncomfortable as it was at the moment, was in reality much better than staying in the cheeseless station. He was taking control rather than simply letting things happen to him. Then he reminded himself if Sniff and Scurry could move on, so could he. Later, as Hall looked back at things, he realized that the cheese and cheese station C had not just appeared overnight, as he had once believed. The amount of cheese that had been there toward the end had been getting smaller, and was left had grown old, and it didn't taste as good. Mold may have even begun to grow on the old cheese, although he had not noticed it. He had to admit, however, that if he had wanted to, he probably could have seen that was coming, but he did not. How now realized that change probably would not have taken him by surprise if he had been watching what was happening all along and if he had anticipated change. Maybe that's what Sniff and Scurry had been doing. He decided he would stay more alert from now on. He would expect change to happen and look for it. He would trust his basic instinct to sense when change was going to occur and be ready to adopt it. He stopped for the rest and wrote on the wall of the maze. What did he write? Smell the cheese often so you know when it is getting old. Smell the cheese often so that you know when it's getting old. Sometimes later, after not finding the cheese for what seemed to be a long time, he finally came across a huge cheese station which looked promising. When he went inside, however, he was more disappointed to discover that the cheese station was empty. This empty feeling had happened to me too often, he thought. He felt like giving up. Haw was losing his physical strength. He knew he was lost and was afraid he would not survive. But he thought about turning around and heading back to Cheese Station C. At least if he made it back and Hame is still there, Haw wouldn't be alone. Then he asked himself the same question again. What would I do if I weren't afraid? Haw thought he was past his fear, but he was afraid more often than he liked to admit, even to himself. He wasn't always sure that he was afraid of what he was afraid of, but in his weakened condition, he knew how he was simply fearful of going on alone. Haw did not know, but he was returning behind because he was still weighed down by fearful beliefs. Haw wondered if Hame had moved on, or if he was still paralyzed by his own fears. Then Haw remembered this time when he had felt his best in the maze. It was when he was moving along. He wrote on the wall, knocking it was as much a reminder to himself as it was a marking for his friend Hame, hopefully to follow. So he wrote, movement in a new direction helps you find new cheese. Movement in a new direction helps you find new cheese. He looked down the dark passageway and was aware of his fear. What lay ahead? Was it empty? Or worse, was there dangerous lurking? He began to imagine all kinds of frightening things that could happen to him. He was scaring himself to death. Then he laughed at himself. He realized his fears of making things worse. So he did what he could do if he weren't afraid. He moved into a new direction. As he started running down the dark corridor, he began to smile. Haw didn't realize it, but he was discovering what nourished his soul. He was letting go and trusting what lay ahead of him, even though he did not know exactly what it was. To his surprise, Haw started to enjoy himself more and more. Why do I feel so good? He wondered. I don't have any cheese, and I don't know where I'm going. Before long, he knew why he felt good. He stopped to write on the wall again. So he wrote, when you stop being afraid, you feel good. When you stop being afraid, you feel good. Haw realized that he had been held captive by his own fear, moving in new direction had freed him. Now he felt the cool breeze that was blowing in the part of the maze and it was refreshing. He took in some deep breaths and felt invigorated by the movement. Once he had gotten past his fear, it turned out to be more enjoyable than once he believed it would be. Had not find this way for a long time, felt this way for a long time. He had almost forgotten how much fun it was to go for it. To make things even better, Haw started to paint a picture in his mind again. He saw himself in the great realistic details, sitting in the middle of a pile of all his favorite cheese, from cheddar to brie. He saw himself eating the many cheeses he liked and enjoyed what he saw. He then imagined how much he would enjoy all the great tastes. The more clearly he saw the image of himself enjoying the new cheese, the more real and believable it became. He would sense that he was going to find it. So he wrote on the wall, imagining yourself enjoying your new cheese leads you to it. Imagining yourself enjoying your new cheese will lead you to it. Hawk kept on thinking about what he could gain instead of what he was losing. He wondered Why he had always thought that a change would lead him to something worse. Now he realized that the change could lead to something better. Why don't I see this before? He asked himself. Then he raced through the maze with greater strength and agility, but before long he spotted a cheese station and became excited as he noticed little pieces of new cheddar cheese near the entrance. They were types of cheese he had never seen before, but they looked great. He tried them and found that they were delicious. He ate most of the new cheese bits that were available and put in a few of his pocket to have later and perhaps share it with him. He began to regain his strength. He entered the cheese station with great excitement, but to his dismay, he found it was empty. Someone had already been there and had left only a few bits of new cheese. He realized that if he had moved sooner, he would have very likely found a good deal of new cheese here. He decided to go back and see if Him was ready to join him. As he retraced his steps, he stopped and wrote on the wall, "The quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you find the new cheese. The quicker you go let go of an old cheese, the sooner you find the new cheese." After a while, Haw made his way back to Cheese Station C and found him. He offered him bits of new cheese, but was turned down. Him appreciated his friend's gesture, but said, "I don't think I would like the new cheese. It's not what I used to. I want my own cheese back, and I'm not going to change until I get what I want." Haw just shook his head with disappointment and reluctantly went back out of his own. As he returned to the farthest point he had reached in the maze, he missed his friend, but realized he liked what he was discovering. Even before he found out he hoped would be a great supply of new cheese if ever, he knew that what made him happy wasn't just having cheese. He was happy when he wasn't being run by his fear. He liked what he was doing now. Knowing this, Haw didn't feel as weak as he did when he stayed in the cheese station C with no cheese. Just realizing he was not letting his fear stop him and knowing that he had taken a new direction nourished him and gave him strength. Now he felt that it was just a question of time before he found what he needed. In fact, he sensed that he was already found what he was looking for. He smiled as he realized one more note. It is safer to search in the maze than remain in a cheeseless situation. It is safer to search in a maze than remain in a cheeseless situation. Alright. Howe realized again that he had become once as he had once before, that what you are afraid of is never as bad as you imagine. The fear you let build up in your mind is worse than the situation that actually exists. He had been so afraid of never finding new cheese that he didn't even want to start looking. But since starting his journey, he found enough cheese in the corridors to keep him going. Now he looked forward to finding more. Just looking ahead was becoming exciting. His old thinking had been clouded by his worries and fears. He used to think about not having enough cheese or not having it last long enough as he wanted. He used to think more about what could go wrong than what could go right. But that had changed in the days since he left the cheese station C. He used to believe that cheese should never be moved and that change wasn't right. Now he realized it was natural for change to continuously occur, but whatever you do, expect it or not. Change could surprise only if you didn't expect it and were not looking for it. When he realized he changed his beliefs, he paused and wrote on the wall, "Old beliefs do not lead you to new cheese. Old beliefs do not lead you to new cheese." Haw had not found any cheese yet, but as he ran through the maze, he thought about what he had already learned. Had Haw now realized that his new beliefs were encouraging new behaviors? He was behaving differently than when he kept returning to the same cheeseless station. He knew that when you change what you believe, you change what you do. You can believe that a change will harm you and resist it, or you can believe that finding new cheese will help you and embrace the change. It all depends on what you choose to believe. So he wrote on the wall again, "When you see that you can find and enjoy new cheese, you change course. When you see that you can find and enjoy new cheese, you change course." Haw knew he would be in better shape now if he had dealt with the change much sooner and left Cheese Station C earlier. He would feel stronger in the body and spirit, and he could have coped better with challenge of finding new cheese. In fact, he probably would have found it by now if he had expected change rather than wasting time denying the change he had already taken place. He used his imagination again and saw himself finding and savoring new cheese. he decided to proceed into and more unknown parts of the maze and found little bits of cheese here and there. Haw began to regain his strength and confidence. As he thought back on where he had come from, Haw was glad he had written on the wall in many places. He trusted that it would serve as a marked trail for him to follow through the maze if he ever chose to leave the station C. He just hoped he was heading in the right direction. He thought about the possibility that Haim would read the handwriting on the wall and find his way. He wrote on the wall what he had been thinking about for some time. So he wrote, noticing small changes early helps you adapt to the bigger changes that are to come. Noticing small changes early helps you adapt to the bigger changes that are to come. By now, Haw had let go of the past and was adapting to the present. He continued on through the maze with greater strength and speed, and before long it happened. When it seemed like he had been in the maze forever, his journey, or at least the part of his journey, ended quickly and happily. Haw proceeded along the corridor was a new to him, round the corner and found New Cheese Station N. When he went inside, he was startled by what he saw. Piled high everywhere was the greatest supply of cheese he had ever seen. He didn't recognize all that he saw, as some kinds of cheese were new to him. Then he wondered for a moment whether it was real or just his imagination, until he saw his old friend Sniff and Scurry. Sniff welcomed Hop with a nod of his head, and Scurry waved his paw. Their fat little bellies showed they had been more here for some time. Hop quickly said his hellos and soon took bites of every one of those favorite cheeses. He pulled off his shoes, tied the laces together, and hung them around the neck in case he needed them again. Sniff and Scurry laughed. They nodded their heads in admiration. Then Haw jumped into the new cheese. When he had eaten his fill, he lifted the piece of fresh cheese and made him a toast. Hooray for change! As Haw enjoyed the new cheese, he reflected on what he had learned. He realized that when he had been afraid to change, he had been holding on to the illusion of old cheese was no longer there. So, what was it made him to change? Was it the fear of starving to death? Haw smiled as he thought it certainly helped. Then he laughed and realized that he had started to change as soon as he had learned to laugh and at himself and what he had been doing wrong. He realized the fastest way to change is to laugh at your own folly. Then you can let go and quickly move on. He knew he had learned something useful, but moving on from his mice friends Sniff and Scurry, they kept life simple. They didn't overanalyze or overcomplicate things. When the situations changed and the cheese had been moved, they changed and moved with the cheese. He would remember that how also use his wonderful brain to do with little people do better than mice. He envisioned himself in realistic detail, finding something better, much better. He reflected on the mistakes he had made in the past and used them to plan for his future. He knew that you could learn to deal with change. You could be more aware of the need to keep things simple, be flexible, and move quickly. You did not need to overcomplicate matters or confuse yourself with fearful beliefs. You could notice when the little changes began so that you would be better prepared for the big change that might be coming. He knew he needed to adapt faster, for if you do not adapt in time, you might as well not adapt at all. He had to admit that the biggest inhibitor to change lies within yourself, and that nothing gets better until you change. Perhaps most importantly, he realized that there is always new cheese out there, whether you recognize it or not, and that you are rewarded with it when you go past your fear and enjoy the adventure. He knew some fear should be respected, as it can change, keep you out of the real danger. But he realized that the most of the fears were irrational and had kept him from changing when he needed to. He did not like it at the time, but he knew that the change had turned out to be a blessing in disguise as it led him to find better cheese. He even found a better part of himself. As Haw recalled what he had learned, he thought about his friend Haim. He wondered if Haim had read any of the sayings Haw had written on the wall at the cheese station C and throughout the maze. Had Haim ever decided to let go and move on? Had he ever entered the maze and discovered what could make this life better? Or was him still hemmed in because he would not change? Hawes thought about going back again to the cheese station C to see if he could find him, assuming Haw could find his way back there. If he found him, he thought he might be able to show him how to get out of his predicament. but Haw realized that he had already tried to get his friend to change. Him had to find his own way beyond his comforts and past his fears. No one else could do it for him or talk to him to into it. He somehow had to see the advantage of changing himself. Haw knew he had left a trail for him and that he could find his way if he could just read the handwriting on the wall. He went over and wrote down a summary of what he had learned on the largest wall of Cheese Station N. He drew a nice piece of cheese around all the insights he had become aware of and smiled as he looked at the wall what he learned. So he wrote so many things this time. Change happens, they keep moving the cheese. Anticipate change, get ready for the change to move. Monitor change, smell the cheese often so you know when it is getting old. Adapt to change quickly. The quicker you do let go of old cheese, the sooner you enjoy the new cheese. Change, move with the cheese. Enjoy change, savor the adventure and enjoy the taste of new cheese. Be ready to change quickly and enjoy it again and again. They keep moving the cheese. Haw realized how far he had come since he had been with him in Cheese Station C, but knew it would be easy for him to slip back if he got too comfortable. So each day he inspected Cheese Station N to see what condition of cheese was. He was going to do whatever he could to avoid being surprised by an unexpected change. While Haw still had a great supply of cheese, he often went into the maze and explored new areas to study and stay in touch with what was happening around him. He knew it was safer to be aware of his real choices than isolate himself in his comfort zone. Then Haw heard what he thought was the sound of movement out of maze. As the noise grew louder, he realized that someone was coming. Could it be him was arriving? Was it about to turn the corner? Haw said a little prayer and hoped, as he had many times before, and maybe at last his friend was finally able to move with the cheese and enjoy it. The end, or is it the new beginning? So, friends, a discussion later in the same day. When Michael finished telling the story, he looked around the room and saw his former classmates smiling at him. Several thanked him and they said they got a good deal out of the story. Nathan asked the group, "What would you think of getting together later and maybe discussing it?" Most of them said they would like to talk about it and say they will arrange a meeting later for a drink before dinner. That evening, as they gathered in the hotel lounge, they began to kid each other about finding their cheese and seeming themselves in the maze. The, then Angela asked the group good naturedly, "So if you were in the story, Sniff's Curry him. So who were you in the story, Sniff's Curry him or Haw?" Carlos answered, "Well, I was thinking about that this afternoon. I clearly remember a time before I had a sporting goods business when I had rough encounter with change. I wasn't Sniff. I didn't sniff out of the situation and did the change early. And I certainly wasn't Scurry. I didn't go in the action immediately. I was more like him, who wanted to stay in the familiar territory. The truth is, I didn't want to deal with the change. I didn't even want to see it. Michael, who felt like no time had passed since he and Carlos were close friends in school, asked, "What are we talking about here, buddy?" Carlos said, "Unexpected change of jobs." Michael laughed. "You were fired?" "Yes, let's just say I didn't want to go out of looking for new cheese. I thought I had good reason why change should happen to me. So I was pretty much upset at that time." Some of these former classmates who were being quiet for some time in the beginning felt more comfortable now and spoke up, including Frank, who had gone into the military. "Him reminds me of a friend of mine," Frank said. "His department was closing down, but he didn't want to see it. They kept relocating his people. We all tried to talk to him about many other opportunities that existed in the company for those who wanted to be flexible, but he didn't think he had to change. He was the only one who was surprised when the department closed. Now he's having a hard time adjusting to the change he didn't think should happen." Jessica said, "I didn't think it should happen to me either, but my cheese has been moved more than once, especially in my personal life, but we can get to that later." Many in the group laughed except Nathan. "Maybe that's the whole point," Nathan said. "Change happens to all of us." He added, "I wish my family had learned the cheese story before this. Unfortunately, we didn't want to see the change coming in our business, and now it's too late. We are having to close many of our stores." That surprised many in the group because they thought Nathan was lucky to be in a secure business he could depend on year after year. "What happened?" Jessica wanted to know. "Our chain of small stores suddenly became old fashioned when the mega stores came in the town with its huge inventory and low prices. We just could not compete with that." I can see now that instead of being like Sniff and Scurry, we were like him. He stayed where we were and didn't change. We tried to ignore what was happening and now we are in trouble. We could have been taken a couple of lessons from Haw because he certainly couldn't laugh at ourselves and change what we were doing. Laura, who had become a successful businesswoman, was been listening but had said very little until now. I thought about the story this afternoon too, she said. I wondered how I could be more like Haw and see what I'm doing wrong, laugh at myself, change, and do better. She said, I am curious, how many here are afraid of change? No one responded, so she suggested, how about no show of hands? Only one hand went up. Well, it looks like we have got one honest person in the group, she said, and then she continued, maybe you'll like this next question better. How many here think other people are afraid of change? Practically everyone raised their hand and then they all started laughing. What does that tell us? Denial, Nathan answered. Sure, Michael admitted. Sometimes we are not even aware that what we are afraid of. I know I wasn't. When I first heard the story, I loved the question, what would you do if you weren't afraid? When Jessica said it, then Jessica added, well, what I got from the story is that change is happening everywhere and that I will do better when I can adjust to it quickly. I remember years ago when our company was selling our encyclopedia as a set of more than 20 books. One person tried to tell us that we should put the whole encyclopedia in a single computer disk and sell it for a fraction of the cost. It could be easier to update, which cost us much lesser to manufacture, and so many more people could afford it. But we all resisted. Why did you resist? Nathan asked. Because we believed that the backbone of our business was the large sales force who called on people door to door, keeping our sales force, one second, guys, keeping our sales force depending on the big commissions they earned from the high price of our product. We had been doing this successfully for a long time and thought it would go on forever. Laura said, maybe that's when what it meant in the story about him and her arrogance of success. They didn't notice they needed to change what had been once working. Nathan said, so you thought your old cheese was really your only cheese? Yes, and we wanted to hang on to it. When I think about back what happened to us, I see that it's not just because they move the cheese, but that the cheese has a life of its own and eventually it turns out. Anyway, we didn't change, but a competitor did, and all our sales fell badly. We have been going into through difficult times. Now, another big technological change is happening in the industry, and no one at the company seems to deal with it. It doesn't look good. I think it could be out of job. I could be out of job soon. It's May's time, Carlos called out. Everyone laughed, including Jessica. Carlos turned to Jessica and said, it's good that you can laugh at yourself. Frank offered. That's what I got out of story. I tend to take myself too seriously. I noticed Haw changed when he could finally laugh at himself and what he was doing. No wonder he was called Haw. The group groaned as obvious play of words. Angela asked, do you think that him ever changed and found new cheese? Elena said, I think he did. I don't, Corey said. Some people never change as they pay price for it. I see people like him in my medical practice. They feel entitled to their cheese. They feel like victims when it's taken away and blame others. They get sicker than people who let go and move on. Then Nathan said quietly as though he was talking to himself, I guess the question is, what do we need to let go of and what do we need to move on to? No one said anything for a while. I must admit, Nathan said, I saw what was happening with the stores like ours in other parts of the country, but I have hoped it would not affect us. I guess it's a lot better to initiate change while you can than it is to try to react to adjust it. Maybe we should just move our cheese. What do you mean? Frank asked. Nathan answered, I can't help but wonder where we would be today if we had sold the real estate all under all our stores and built one great modern store to compete with the best of them. Laura said, maybe that's what Haw meant when he wrote on the wall, savor the adventure and move with the cheese. Frank said, I think some things should not change. For example, I want to hold on to my basic values, but I realize now that I would be better off if I had moved with the cheese a lot sooner in my life. Well, Michael, it was a nice little story, Richard the class skeptic said. But how did you actually put it into use in your company? The group didn't know it yet, but Richard was experiencing some changes himself. Recently separated from his wife, he was now trying to balance his career with raising his teenagers. Michael replied, I thought my job was just to manage the daily problems as they came up when I should have been doing what I love. was looking ahead and paying attention to where we were going. And boy, did I manage those problems. 24 hours a day, I wasn't a lot of fun to be around. I was in rat race and I could not get out. Laura said, "So you were managing where you needed to be leading." Exactly, Michael said. Then, when I heard the story of Who Moved My Cheese, I realized my job was to paint a picture of the new cheese that we would all want to pursue so that we can enjoy changing and succeeding, whether it was at work or in life. Nathan said, "What do you do at work?" Well, when I asked people in our company who they were in the story, I saw we had every one in our four characters in our organization. I came to see that Sniffs and Scurries, Hames and Haws each needed to be treated differently. Our Sniffs could sniff out change in the marketplace, so they helped us update our corporate vision. They were encouraged to identify how the changes would result in new products and services a customer would want. The Sniffs loved it as loved it and told us that they enjoy working in a place that recognized change and adapt at time. Our scurries like to get things done, so they were encouraged to take actions based on the new corporate vision. They just needed to be monitored so that they didn't scurry off in wrong direction. They were then rewarded for actions and brought up new cheese. They like working in the company that value action and result. What about Hames and Haws? Angela asked. Unfortunately, the Hames were anchors that slowed us down, Michael answered. They were either too comfortable or too afraid to change. Some of our hymns changed only when they saw the sensible vision we painted that showed them how changing world worked to their advantage. Our hymns told us they wanted to work in a place that was safe, so the change needed to make sense to them and increase their sense of security. When they realized the real danger of not changing, some of them changed and did well. The vision helped us turn many of our hymns into horse. What did you do with the hymns who did not change? Frank wanted to know. We had to let them go, Michael said sadly. We wanted to keep all our employees, but we knew if our business did not change quickly enough, we would be all in trouble. He then said, "The good news is that while our haws were initially hesitant, they were open minded enough to learn new things, act differently, and adapt in time to help us succeed. They came to expect things and actively for it. They came to expect change and actively looked for it. Because they understood human nature, they helped us paint a realistic vision of new cheese that made good sense to practically everyone. They told us they told us they wanted to work in an organization that gave people the confidence and tools to change, and they helped us keep our senses of humor as we went after the new cheese, Richard commented. You got all that from a little story? Michael smiled. It wasn't a story, but what we did differently based on what we took from it. Angela admitted, I am a little bit like him, so for me, the most powerful part of the story was when Hall laughed at his fear and went on to paint a picture in his mind where he saw himself enjoying new cheese. It made going into the maze less fearful and more enjoyable, and he eventually got a better deal. That's what I want to do more often. Fang grinned. So even hymns can sometimes see the advantage of changing. Carlos laughed, like the advantage of keeping their jobs. Angela added, or even getting a good raise. Richard, who had been frowning during the discussion, said, my manager's been telling me to company our company needs to change. I think when she's really telling me is that I need to change. But I haven't wanted to hear it. I never really wanted what the new cheese was when she was trying to move us to, or how could I gain from it. A light smile crossed Richard's face as he said, I must admit I like the idea of seeing new cheese and imagining yourself enjoying it. It lightens everything up. When you see how it can make things better, you get more interested in making the change happen. Okay guys, let me just see how much book is remaining. Alright, few more pages I guess. Maybe I could use this. In my personal life, he added, my children seem to think that nothing in their life should ever change. I guess they were acting like him. They're angry, not probably afraid of what the future holds. Maybe I haven't painted a realistic picture of the new cheese for them, probably because I don't see it myself. The group was quiet as several people thought about their own lives. Well, Jessica said, the most people here have been talking about our jobs, but I listened to the story. I also thought about my personal life. I think my current relationship is old cheese that was some pretty serious mold on it. Corey laughed in agreement. Me too. I probably need to let go of a bad relationship. Angela countered. Oh, perhaps the old cheese is just old behavior. What we really need to let go is the behavior that is cause of our bad relationship. and then move on to a better way of thinking and acting. Ouch, Corey reacted. Good point. The new cheese is a new relationship with the same person. Richard said, I'm beginning to think there's more to it than I thought. I like the idea of letting go of old behavior instead of letting go of the relationship. Repeating the same behavior will just get into the same result. As work goes, maybe instead of changing job, I should be changing the way I'm doing my job. I probably have a better position by now if I did. Then Becky, who lived in another city but had returned to the reunion, said, "As I was listening to the story and to everyone's comments here, I've had a laugh at myself. I've been like him for so long, having and hawing, and afraid of change. I didn't realize how many other people did this as well. I'm afraid I passed it on to my children without even knowing it. As I think about it, I realize change really can lead you to a new and better place, although you are afraid it won't be at the time. I remember a time when our son was a sophomore in high school. My husband's job required us to move from Illinois to Vermont, and our son was upset because he had to leave his friends. He was a star swimmer in the high school in Vermont and had to swim team. So he was angry with us for making him move. As it turned out, he fell in love with Vermont mountains, took up skiing, skied in the college team, and now lives happily in Colorado. If he had all enjoyed, if we had all enjoyed this cheese story together over the cup of hot chocolate, we could have saved our family a lot of stress. Jessica said, I'm going home to tell my family this story. I'll ask my children who they think I am, sniffs curry him or her, and who they feel they are. We could talk about what we feel our family's old cheese is and what our new cheese could be. That's a good idea, Richard said, surprising everyone, even himself. Frank then commented, I think I'm going to be more like Hop and move with the cheese and enjoy it. And I'm going to pass this story along to my friends who are worried about leaving the military and what the change might mean to them. It could lead to some interesting discussions. Michael said, well, that's how we improved our business. We had several discussions about what we got from the cheese story and how we could apply in our situation. It was great because we had language that was fun for us. We used to talk about how we are dealing with change. It was very effective, especially as it spread deeper into the company. Nathan asked, "What do you mean by deeper?" Well, the further we went on into our organization, the more people we found who felt they had less power. They were understandably more afraid of what the change imposed from above might do to them. So there is the change. In short, a change imposed is a change opposed. But then the cheese story was shared with literally everyone in our organization. It helped us change the way we looked at change. It helped everyone laugh, or at least smile, and their own fears and want to move on. I only wished I had heard the story sooner. Michael added. How come? Because by the time we got around to addressing the changes, our business had already fallen off so badly that we had to let people go, as I said earlier, including some good friends. It was hard for all of us. However, those who stayed and most of those who left said the cheese story helped them see things differently and eventually cope better. Those who had to go out and look for new jobs said it was hard at first, but recalling the story was a great help to them. Angela asked, what helped them most? Michael replied, after they got their past fear, they told me the best thing was realizing that there was new cheese out there just waiting to be found. They said they said holding a picture of new cheese in their minds, seeing themselves doing well in a new job made them feel better and helped them to do better in the job interviews. Several got better jobs also. Laura asked, what about the people who remained in your company? Well, Michael said, instead of complaining about the changes that were happening, people now said they just moved our cheese. Let's look for new cheese. It saved them a lot of time and reduced stress. Before long, people had been resisting the same advantage of changing. They even helped bring about the change. Corey said, what do you think they changed? Why do you think they changed? They changed after the peer pressure in our company changed. He asked, what happens in more organization you have been in where change is announced by the top management? Do people say that change is a great idea or a bad idea? A bad idea, Frank answered. Yes, Michael agreed. Why? Carlos said, because people want things to stay the same and they think the change will be bad for them. When one person says the change is a bad idea, others say the same. Yes, they may not really feel like that way, Michael said, but they agree in order to fit in. That's the sort of peer pressure that fight changes in any organization. Becky asked, so how were different things after people heard the cheese story? Michael said simply, The peer pressure changed. No one wanted to look like him. Everyone laughed. They wanted to sneak out of changes ahead of time and scurry into action rather than get hemmed in and be left behind. Nathan said that's a good point. No one in our company would want to look like him. They might even change. Why didn't you tell us this story in our last reunion? This could work. Michael said it does work. It works best, of course, when everyone in your organization knows the story, whether it is in the large corporation or a small business or your family, because an organization can only change when enough people in it change. Then he offered one last thought. When we saw how well it worked for us, we passed the story along to people we wanted to do business with. Knowing they will also be dealing with change, we suggested we might be their new cheese, that is, better partners for them to succeed with. It led to new business. That gave Jessica several ideas and reminded her that she had some early sales calls in the morning. She looked at her watch and said, well, it's time for me to leave this cheese station and find some new cheese. The group laughed and began saying their goodbyes. Many of them wanted to continue the conversation but needed to leave. As they left, they thanked Michael again. He said, I'm very glad you found the story so useful and I hope that you will have the opportunity to share it with others soon. So, friends, that is the book Who Moved My Cheese, and I myself learned so much once again by reading this book. And if you want me to read more books to you word by word, do share in the comment section which book you want me to read. And as always, click a like and subscribe and press the bell icon so that you get notification of any new messages that I send here. So that's all about it, guys. Love change, enjoy change, and yeah, when we are afraid, laugh at the situation, and the fear goes away. Right? So, so many things I personally learned from this whole amazing book, "Who Moved My Cheese" by Dr. Spencer John. "Who Moved My Cheese" by Dr. Spencer John. Thank you so much for tuning.